Hi, David.
How are you?
Good, thank God. Oh, well.
Cold enough for you?
Yeah. Trying to stay warm. Hi, Kent. Hi, Winston.
Rabbi, David, Winston.
No, I can't.
Okay, let me just get the screen ready and I'll share it and we can get started. Okay. I haven't really seen the news today. I think it's coming under control a bit better in KwaZulu-Natal there.
Yeah.
Also, I haven't watched the news today. It was too much yesterday.
Yeah, it was. I think listen, I hope we'll see it under control soon. It certainly will pass. It's just devastating for those directly affected.
Frightening.
Yeah. Okay, let me share the screen. We've passed one. I don't want to keep you guys too late. It's a longer-ish chapter, I guess. But should get through it. Okay, so it's the fifth chapter in this section of Matnos Aniyim, the gifts to the poor from our harvest, from the agriculture, from the field, right? And today we're going to go into the next gift, which is given, which is referred to as shikha. Shikha literally means that which is forgotten. And we'll see that there's two kind of components to forgotten grain or other produce. There's that which you kind of miss, you forget, you overlook during the harvest, and then there's that which you forget to overlook, even once it's been collected, as you are removing the produce to its final destination, something which we'll also define in the chapter. Okay, so let's begin. I'll make it a little bit bigger here. And we'll look at the first halakha. In none of the following situation is a forgotten sheaf of grain considered as shikha. Okay, so we'll keep using this term shikha. Shikha means that which is forgotten, and it then becomes designated as a gift to the poor as the others, as paya and leket, which we've learned about previously. But in the following scenarios, it won't be considered shikha. What's the scenarios? It was forgotten by workers and not forgotten by the owner of the field. So in other words, or if it was forgotten by the owner of the field, but not by the workers, or but both these individuals forgot it, but there were others passing by who observed them at the time, they forgot it. So in other words, if somebody can be or will be reminded by somebody else to go back, so long as it's still in the field and it's not completely forgotten, overlooked in other words, that's not considered shikha. To be shikha, it must be forgotten by all people. Even now this is something on the other side, even a sheaf that was hidden away purposely, if it is forgotten, it is shikha. So something was hidden away, but if it's forgotten by everyone, it would actually be shikha. Again, this means that when you're in the process of either the harvesting or collecting and taking away from the field, and it got completely overlooked, and in the normal course of things, you wouldn't have remembered it, that's considered shikha, and it must be left for the poor. But if it's not forgotten to everyone, that means while it's still in the field, you may recall it or someone will point you to it, then it is not shikha. So here's a scenario that just highlights this point again, that shikha applies when it's in the field. So when the owner of the field was in the city, and he said, I know that the workers forgot a sheaf in this and this place, but afterwards the owner forgot it, it is shikha. Meaning when he came back home and he came to the field, but he overlooked it again, he forgot about it, it's considered shikha. In other words, although at the time when they were doing the harvesting or collecting the sheaves, he knew that his workers had left it, right? But that was when he was away from the field. Now that he's back at the field, he has a moment of, a memory lapse around this particular sheaf, then it is considered shikha. If he was in the field and made such statements, but then forgot the sheaf, it is not shikha. Meaning if when he was in the field, he says, I know in the other corner that my workers left certain sheaves. Then he left, he went to the city. And while he was in the city, he completely forgot about it. He got onto other things. That doesn't matter, because so long as when he was in the field, at the time that it was either being gathered or harvested, he put his mind to it. It's not considered shikha. He can go back and collect it for himself. If it was in the field, Sargon. Only a sheaf that was forgotten at the outset is shikha. Right, meaning while he was in the field, but in a city, by contrast, even if one remembered it and afterwards forgot it, it is shikha, as indicated if you forget a sheaf in the field. One second, now I just confused there. In a city, I feel right, when he comes, in other words, if he was in the city, but he comes back and at the field he forgets it, then it is then it is shikha. But if he was in the city when he forgot it, that is not shikha, because he has to be there in the field, as the verse says, when you were in the field, you forgot it. Halacha 3. If a poor person stood in front of the sheaf, in other words, he had sheaves in his field that had been collected, but not yet removed from the field. Now he's coming to collect the sheaves, and a poor person stands in front of it, so he doesn't see it. So he's going to overlook it. He's going to forget it. Or if the poor person covered it over with straw to hide it away, right? Now, and he remembered the straw, or he took hold of it to bring it to the city, but left it in the field and forgot it, it's not shikha. Okay, so if somebody else put something in the way to cause him to not see it and then forget it, it's not considered shikha. Or in a scenario where he took it initially together with the others, but then left it, because at the moment of the gathering, he remembered it, it can no longer become shikha later. If ever he moved it from place to place, even if he left it next to a gate, a grain heap, cattle or utensils, and he forgot it, it is shikha. So if he grabbed it and dropped and he left it, that's going to be shikha. But if he took it and placed it it's not going to be shikha, sorry. But if he took it and placed it somewhere, and here, these are kind of distinct places in the field which he knows he'll come back to. So he's hoping, right, that when he gets back there, he'll be reminded again. But then he forgot about it before he comes back. That would still be shikha if he had picked it up and moved it there and left it and then forgot it. Okay, because that's forgetting it in the field. Halacha 4. The following applies if he took a sheaf with the intent of bringing it into the city, put it down on another sheaf, and then forgot both of them. So he picked up a sheaf. He was going to take it. And this one now, remember, we said if when you pick it up, you're intending to take it, it cannot become shikha again, even if you put it back down and forget it. But the one that he's placed it on top of, he never had that interaction with it, right? So he took a sheaf, he placed it on another one. So he says, and then now he forgets both of them. So what happens? Are they both considered shikha? Remember, the top one technically can't be shikha. So he says, if you remember the top sheaf before he sees it, then the bottom one is not shikha. Because by remembering that one and going back to it, he would automatically see the one under it. But if not, the bottom one is shikha. If he didn't remember the top one, so the top one cannot be shikha, right? But the bottom one can be shikha. That's the point, right? The bottom one he never had actually taken with an intention. So therefore it can be shikha. In other words, if afterwards it's left out there and he didn't remember it. Halacha. If a person's sheaves flew into a field belonging to a colleague because of a strong wind, and he forgot a sheaf there, it's not shikha, meaning it was out of sight and therefore out of mind, but because it went out of sight into somebody else's field as the result of the wind, that's not considered out of mind, that's not considered shikha. Because as the verse says, if you reap your harvest in your field, it can only be considered forgotten if while you were reaping in your own field. If ever the one scattered the sheaves within his own field, so out of sight, out of mind, but it's in his own property, and he forgets them, that is shikha. Okay? Halacha 6. Following rule applies when a person takes the first, second, and third sheaves, but leaves the fourth. So again, here you've got sheaves that have been gathered together, right? It's bundles of wheat or other grain, and you start collecting them in a row. So you take, they like kind of laid out. You take 1, 2, 3. You miss 4. You haven't taken 4. Now he says, if there's 6 rows, in other words, in each row you're taking one sheaf, right? So if there's 6, then the 4th sheaf is not shikha until he takes the 5th. He actually has to take the 5th, because then it indicates that it was out of his mind. He's forgotten the 4th one. And then once he takes the 5th one, the 4th one is considered forgotten. Yes, it can continue with the 6th. If there's only 5 sheaves, 5 in a row, then when he bends down to take the 5th sheaf, even before he's actually picked it up, it's already considered that the 4th, which he had missed out, is already considered shikha. Halacha 7, when the sheaves in a field are mixed together. So in halacha 6, we're talking about when they were quite orderly, placed in an orderly fashion. So once he's gone from 3, he missed 4 and he goes on to 5. So if there's 6, he has to actually take the 5th. If there's only 5, he has to, indicate that he's planning to take it. It's already shikha. But what is if the sheaves are just scattered around? They're not placed in an orderly fashion. So this is what it means, mixed together. And then he forgot one of them. It's not considered shikha unless he takes everything around it. You can't say because he picked up 3 and now he missed, it seems like he missed it. It's not considered missed until the whole area around it has been collected and that one was left alone. We'll see there could be more than one, but what was left was left. Okay, now, although wild onions, garlic, and regular onions and the like are buried in the earth, the laws of shikha apply to them. But remember, because even though they're hidden in the ground, we said earlier, if somebody hid something from you, it can't become shikha. Right? But here he's saying these things that naturally grow in the ground hidden, at least the main fruit of it is hidden, the main fruit of it is hidden, shikha would apply. When a person harvests his field at night, that means if he was going and picking and he left it, meaning that he forgot to take it, that's considered left. When a person harvests his field at night and forgets standing grain, or he binds the grain into sheaves at night and forgets a sheaf and similar, or blind man who forgets sheaves, the laws of shikha apply. If however the blind person or the one harvesting at night only intended to take bulky sheaves, the laws of shikha do not apply. In other words, if he knew that when he was doing it in the dark, he's not going to get everything, so he only plans on taking the big stuff because he's going to be coming back, then nothing left behind is shikha. But if he went in with the intention that this is his harvest, this is his collection, and he's bound to leave stuff because of the dark, nonetheless, that is shikha. Similar to the blind person or someone working in the dark. Whenever a person says, I'm harvesting the field on the condition that I may take what I forget, that's no good. You can't say, okay, I'm going in now, and I'm only going to take what I get hold of now, but what I forget, I'm going to go back for. Right? No, that's not okay. Even though we just said previously that he goes in and he's only going to collect the big stuff, that would be fine. Because why? Because if he says that, then basically he's making a statement that goes against the essential halakha, the essential mitzvah. And whenever a person establishes a condition that contradicts the Torah, the condition is nullified. We've learned a similar concept previously. Halacha 9. When grain was harvested before it's fully matured, with the intent that it be fed to animals, the laws of shikha do not apply. Okay, so it's only food that you are collecting for yourself. Similarly, if a person binds the grains into small bundles as he harvests without binding them to sheaves, or he uprooted garlic or onions and made them into small bundles to sell in the marketplace instead of binding them into large sheaves to store in a storehouse, the laws of shikha do not apply. So if it's like for immediate use, not gathering, it's not shikha. Halacha 10, when a person began harvesting from the beginning of a row. Okay, so imagine you've got a very nicely structured field and you're going down your row and you forgot grain both in front of him and behind him. This obviously here we're talking about is previously most of the halachot that we're talking about was when you were collecting the sheaves. So it's already grain that has been harvested and collected. Now here we're talking about obviously standing grain, which can also be shikha. So you're going down your field and you're harvesting. You're going up the row in an orderly fashion. So he says both grain, there's still grain in front of you and there's grain behind you. The grain behind them is shikha. The grain in front of him is not shikha. Okay? As implied by the pasuk, do not go back to take it. I'm not sure what's implied. He seems to imply that it's possible to have shikha about grain that's ahead of you. I'm not quite sure what the scenario here is. Because he says that the law would only apply to that which you've passed, which seems to be obvious. So I can't really understand what the scenario is, but he seems to imply that we can consider some grain that's ahead of you to already have been forgotten. Okay, but either way, the halacha is based on the verse is that you don't go back. So only the one that's behind you can be shikha. Not the grain is not shikha unless the harvester passed it and leaves it behind. This is the general principle. Whenever the adjuration do not return applies, whatever the scenario is, if you passed it, only then can shikha apply. But whenever do not return does not apply, the law of shikha does not apply. Halacha 11. Now this is an interesting scenario. So imagine it's a field with a perfect line of grain. And you got two people that meet in the middle of the field, and one goes north and one goes south. Okay? And there was one area in between them that was not touched. So here's the story. Two people began harvesting from the middle of the field, one facing north, other facing south, and they both got sheaves in front of them and behind them. The sheaves in front of them are shikha. Now, didn't we just said before that the sheaves in front of them are not shikha, right? Why is it shikha? Because he says, because for the other person, it's behind them. So this is quite it's an interesting halacha, because we consider them as one. Even though this particular person didn't pass it, he's moving this way. Whatever this guy is in front of this guy that he moves past, it's behind this guy. It's considered forgotten to this guy. Okay, because what's in front of one is behind the other. The sheep that was forgotten behind them in the place from which they began harvesting. So they came to the middle. If there was a sheep right in the middle, that middle one, he says, is not shikha. Why? Because it is combined with the rows that run from east to west, and they indicate that this is not shikha. Because these guys are going south to north, right? Or north and south. But because that middle one could be seen as a cross row, it's considered part of the cross row. Nobody's passed that yet. And so that's not yet shikha. A similar complex concept applies with regard to rows of sheaves that were being moved to the threshing floor, and two people began collecting them from the middle of the field and forgot a sheep in the middle between their backs. The laws of shikha do not apply. The rationale is that it is in the midst of the row between the west and east where they have not begun collecting. Its position indicates that it was not forgotten. So the law would be the same for standing grain that's in the midst of harvesting, or rows of sheaves that are being collected, because that one that they started from that's missing could be looked at from the other direction and is not yet being passed. But anything in front of the both of them is considered behind the other one and can be considered shikha. Okay. Halacha 12. The following rule applies when a person harvests or binds the grain into sheaves and then moves these sheaves, which are called omrim, from one place to another, and then from the second place to a third. So you've got these bundles of sheaves, you're moving them around your field. And then from the third to the threshing floor. What we're going to see is the principle over here is that if you move stuff around, that's not considered, and you leave something, you forget something, it's not a problem until that collection and moving is the final move, so to speak. And then it can be considered shikha, as we'll see. So should he forget a sheaf when he is moving from one place to another? If he forgot it when he was moving to a place where work is completed, that's the point, right? The laws of shikha apply. Afterwards, when he moves it from the place where the work is completed to the threshing floor, the laws of shikha do not apply. But if he moved the sheaves to a place where work is not completed and forgot them, the laws of shikha do not apply. Meaning if he took it somewhere as it was going to, just as a pit stop, so to speak, to where he's going, where it needs to be in the field, whatever he left going to that pit stop is not considered shikha yet. Okay, if he moved the sheaves to a place where work is not complete and forgot them, the law of shikha do not apply. Afterwards, when he moves it from the place where the work is not complete to the threshing floor, that's the final destination where it's going to be stored or produced, then the laws of shikha do apply. What gets left behind from that stage is considered shikha. What constitutes a place where work is completed? Okay, so we've said where work is completed, that move would be shikha. But what constitutes this? So he says a place where one intends to collect all the sheaves and thresh them there, or take them to the threshing floor. What constitutes a place where work is not complete? A place where sheaves are collected to bind them into larger sheaves to bring them to another place. Right? It's like you collect them into small bundles, then you're going to make them bigger and take it on from there. That's not considered a final destination or work complete. When two bundles of grain are separate from each other, the laws of shikha apply. Okay, so now we want to know, how much does shikha apply to? So he says two bundles can still be shikha. If there are three, the laws of shikha do not apply. Okay, so if you were gathering bundles, if you left three behind, that would not be considered shikha, but only two, it would. So, and soon we'll see, we'll also talk about the volume of these particular bundles. When two sheaves are separated from each other, the laws of shikha apply. If there are three, the laws of shikha do not apply. Okay, so it's bundles or sheaves, same thing, 2 or 3. 2 is still considered shikha, 3 already is not shikha. 15, when two mounds of olives or carobs are separate from each other. So we've only spoken about grain up until this point, but it would apply also to fruit. Right, so if you have 2 mounds of olives or carobs separate from each other, the laws of shikha apply. If there are 3, the laws of shikha do not apply. When two bundles of flax are separated from each other, the laws of shikha apply. If there are 3, the laws of shikha do not apply. This is when you're using flax for food. Remember, we already made that point. Not if you're taking it in order to produce material. That would be, no shikha would apply then. When there are 2 vines or 2 of any other tree and are separate from each other, the laws of shikha apply. If there are 3, the law of shikha do not apply. And all of this is derived from the pasuk. You shall leave them, plural, for the poor person and the stranger. Halacha 17. If all the sheaves contain, okay, so now we're going to talk about the volume. Okay, so now first we said that 2 can be considered shikha. 3 is not considered shikha, because I guess the point is you'll remember 3 or you're going to go back to it. It seems like you overlooked it, but there's no way you've completely forgotten it, right? That's the assumption. What about the volume of a particular sheave or bundle? And he's going to talk here about 2 concepts, an objective volume and a relative volume, right? So sometimes the relative volume will indicate that it's not forgotten. Sometimes the objective volume will indicate that it's not forgotten, or vice versa, that it would still be considered forgotten. So if all the sheaves contains a kav, these are obviously halachic measurements. I don't remember offhand how it translates into our measurements. So let's just use the halachic terms for today. But if you have a kav and one contains 4 kavim and it was forgotten, the laws of shikha apply. So this is a single sheaf, 4 times the size of the other sheaves in that field. It's still considered shikha. But if it contains more than 4 times, then shikha doesn't apply. Similarly, if the sheaves all contain 2 kavim and there was one which contained more than 8 kavim, the laws of shikha do not apply. The point is it's 4-to-1 ratio. It's still shikha of the average size of the sheaves. More than that, it's considered distinct, unique, not forgotten. Okay. When one forgets a sheaf that contains 2 sa'ah. Now, a sa'ah is a very significant size. I think in the note here tells us what it is compared to kav. A sa'ah is 6 kavim. Okay, so it's a very significant size of grain. Then the laws of shikha do not apply. As the verse says, when you forget a sheaf in the field. And the point is that it should be an omer, an individual sheaf, and not a gadish, which implies an entire grain heap. When it's the size of 2 sa'ah, right? So if 1 sa'ah is 6 kavim, this is 12 kavim. It's a very large amount. It's already considered a grain heap, and shikha does not apply to a heap, only to a sheaf. Okay, this applies even if one collects all the grain into sheaves containing 2 sa'ah. Okay, so technically, if you made all your sheaves that big, there's no shikha. In other words, even if relative to the other ones, it's the same size, not 4 times plus of the others, it's still not considered shikha because of the volume of the individual gathering. When a person forgets 2 sheaves, the laws of shikha apply, even though together they contain 2 sa'ah. So this is important. Although we're saying 2 sa'ah is an amount that alone in volume would not be considered shikha, but if you have 2 separate sheaves, each one very large, 1.5 or 1 3/4 sa'ah, and together they make the 2 sa'ah or more, they would still each individually be considered shikha. We don't combine them and say, oh, together there's 2 sa'ah there, so that it's no longer shikha. It would be considered. It thus appears to me that the laws of shikha apply, even though together they contain more than 2 sa'ah. Okay. When there are more than 2 sa'ah of standing grain left unharvested, the laws of shikha do not apply. Okay, so this again is before we talk about collecting sheaves. Now we're talking, remember, the shikha also applies to the standing grain. So you're saying the same thing would apply. If you've gone through your field and there's more than 2 sa'ah remaining, shikha does not apply. It's not like, okay, I went through my field, I forgot to harvest that area. No, well, if there's that much still standing, it's not shikha. If less than 2 sa'ah were left, we consider the thin stalks as if they were healthy and long, and those with the few kernels as if they were full. If were such consideration made, grain would be sufficient to produce 2 sa'ah, and he forgot that the laws of shikha do not apply. What he's basically saying is like this: is if you left over an area where technically there's not 2 sa'ah because your grain was not so robust, what we can do is we can look at that grain and the area in which it grew, and we say, well, if this was robust grain, would it equal 2 sa'ah? If the answer is yes, then even that area that technically has less than 2 sa'ah would also not be considered shikha. Okay? When a person forgets a sa'ah of grain that has been cut down and a sa'ah which has not been cut down, they are not combined. So you can't say that I've got sheaves, which is less than the sa'ah, and standing grain that's a sa'ah. So together I've got 2 sa'ah in my field that's not collected. The shikha would apply to it because we don't combine the 2. Each one would the law of shikha would apply. Similarly, with regard to garlic, onion, and fruit from a tree, if a person forgot a portion of them in or attached to the ground, then a portion of them detached, they cannot be combined to conform a single quantity. Instead, even though together they are 2 sa'ah, the law of shikha applies to each of them, which means basically that shikha can end up being a massive gift for the poor people of that area. Because up to these amounts, if you forgot it, you got to leave it for the poor. That's the biblical mitzvah. When a person forgets a sheaf at the side of the standing grain that was not forgotten. Okay, this is an interesting law. It's similar to something we learned also about Neket, where it gets kind of connected to the other. So again, you've got standing sheaves on the one side of the field that was not forgotten. You haven't yet harvested it. The laws of shikha do not apply. What does it mean? When you harvest and you forget the sheaf. In other words, you have sheaves that were not collected. So technically it may have been forgotten, but you got the whole area of the field that you haven't yet harvested. So it's considered part of that area that has not yet been harvested. So imply that when a sheaf is located in an area that has been harvested, then the laws of shikha apply. But when a sheaf is located in an area where there is standing grain, the laws of shikha do not apply. Okay. Similarly, if you forgot standing grain that was located next to standing grain that was not forgotten, even one stem, it rescues the forgotten grain and the owner is permitted to come and take it. If you forgot a sheaf or standing grain at the side of a sheaf that was not forgotten, even in other words, so standing grain can kind of incorporate the non-standing grain or non-standing grain. But sheaves that were not forgotten cannot contain standing grain that was forgotten or sheaves that were forgotten. Even if the sheaves contain two saw, it does not rescue the forgotten grain, and that grain belongs to the poor. Standing grain belonging to a colleague does not rescue one's own sheaves. In other words, you had shikha at the edge of your field and your neighbor has not yet harvested. That doesn't count. It's got to be your field. Nor does standing barley rescue a sheaf of wheat. If you grow wheat and barley in your field and you forgot the barley sheaf there and you haven't yet touched the wheat, it's not going to save your barley. Instead, the standing grain must be of the same species as the sheaf. Okay. When a person forgets a tree among others, even if it carries many sa'ah fruit, or if you've got two trees, the laws of shikha apply, right? So it's in an orchard, you're going through and you missed out a whole tree. Even if there's many sa'ah of fruit on that tree, it's forgotten. And there could be even two trees that are standing next to each other. We'll see, though, that there are other exceptions when it comes to trees. If you've got three, the law of shikha does not apply. Okay. When does the above apply? With regard to a tree that is not well known and distinguished by its place. For example, it was located at the side of the olive press or an open portion of a fence by its yield. Sorry, of fence or by its yield. For example, produced many olives or its name, e.g. Okay, let me just say this in my own way. Basically, what the Rambam says is like this. When is a tree considered forgotten, even if it's a massive tree with much greater yield than two sa'ah? That's if it's like has no distinction to it. So you've forgotten, you're never going back to it. But if there was a tree that had a unique position in the field that you're likely to go back, the tree that's next to the gate, or that tree that always outperforms other trees, or that tree that always underperforms other trees. In other words, it has a distinction. So then if the tree has a distinction and you forgot it, shikha doesn't apply to it. Because there's going to be something you'll always be able to refer to and say, what about the tree next to the press or the tree next to the gate or that one that always produces so great? So if it's distinguished in any of these three ways, the law of shikha do not apply. And this again is derived from the pasuk which says, "V'shachachta omer b'sada," and you shall forget a sheaf in the field. Meaning, it's implied that a sheaf that could be forgotten forever, which you'll not bring to mind unless you return to see it. That's considered forgotten. But all of these have distinctions that will remind you of them, even if you don't go back to see it, right? It excludes these truths that you'll remember afterwards, even if you do not encounter it, because it's well known and distinguished, either by its position or by its particular positive or negative yield. If a tree is distinguished in the mind of the owners, it is as if it is well known and distinguished. Meaning, we just spoken about a tree that's distinguished. I mean, how well known does this tree have to be? Does it have to be known to the whole area that, tree A in what's the name's field is a great producer? No, as long as the balabos of the field knows, that particular tree is distinct. As long as in his mind it's distinct to him, that's considered distinguished. If an olive tree was located next to a palm tree, the palm causes it to be distinguished. If that would be an indicator. If two trees are flowing olives, each one causes the other to be distinguished, meaning this is they're unique in their yield, what they put out. If, however, one's entire field consists of flowing olives and one forgets one or two trees, the laws of shikha apply. Now, in a field where the trees produce average and one outperforms, that's considered distinguished. But if you have to have an orchard that outperforms all other orchards, all your trees do that, then it's got to be compared relative to the other trees in your orchard, and it's not distinct then. When is the concept of the laws of shikha? When is the concept that the laws of shikha do not apply to a tree that is distinguished relevant when one has not begun harvesting this distinguished tree. Okay, so if you forgot the whole tree, it's not considered forgotten, and you can go back to it. But if ever one began harvesting it and then forgot a portion of it, then the laws of shikha apply, even though it is distinguished, provided less than 2 sa remain upon it. So although we said earlier 2 sa is not an amount of a tree that we're concerned about, that's only true when it's an indistinguishable tree. If it's a distinguished tree and you've started harvesting it, then if you've left more than 2 sa, you can go back to it. However, if it is less than 2 sa, then shikha would apply. Shikha won't apply if there's more than 2 sa. Unless if you get the entire tree, as we explained, the entire tree obviously you can come back to. Following law applies with regard to an olive tree standing alone in the middle of rows of olive trees, meaning there are 3 rows of trees surrounding it on 3 sides. Even though each of these rows contains only 2 olive trees, if the owner forgot the olive tree in the middle, the laws of shikha do not apply because the rows of trees hid it. Why was this law stated only with regard to an olive tree? For they were important in Eretz Yisrael at that time. So these laws, but it would really apply to any fruit-bearing tree with the same kind of conditions that we've spoken about over here with regard to olive tree. Olive was just a distinct, unique tree and obviously quite plentiful at the time in the land of Israel. 26. When do the laws of shikha apply with regard to vines? Okay, so vines lifted on a trellis. Whenever the owner has passed the grapes to the extent that he cannot extend his hand and take them. A trellis would be where the vine goes above, is growing above. So you would have to reach to reach it. So if you've moved far away enough that your reach will no longer be able to connect with the grapes in it, then it's considered shikha. When do they apply in a vineyard? A vineyard is regular, where the vines are growing kind of at a regular height. When he passes the vine or the vines and forgets them. So when it's on a trellis, he actually has to move beyond it far enough that he can't extend his hands anymore. If it's lower down, the vineyard, he just has to walk past it. Then it's considered shikha. When do they apply with regard to a vine draped over a high support or a palm tree? When he descends from it. So because we're talking now about something that he would actually have to get onto a ladder to go and take the grapes. If you've gone up and you've taken down and now you've come down, that's when it's shikha. And with regard to other trees, when he turns and walks away from it, again, those are what the difference is when you can reach it on your own or when you have to go up to get it. If you can reach it, as soon as you walk past it, it's shikha. If you've gone up to reach the fruit, then once you come back down, it's shikha. When does the Bible apply? When he did not begin harvesting its fruit. If I ever began harvesting its fruit and forgot, the laws of shikha do not apply until he harvests all the fruit in the surrounding area. Halacha 27, when a person declares his vineyard ownerless. Okay, so we've touched on this idea of making hefker previously, but if the guy says, my field's ownerless, right? Then in the morning he gets up and he quickly acquires back for himself. And now he begins to harvest it. See, the thing is like this, if I bought a field that was full, right? I'm not obligated in these things because it has to be my growth, my harvest. So now this guy, what did he do? He made his field ownerless and now he takes back the ownership. So, and now he starts to harvest it. He is bound by the laws of Peret, Olelot, Shikha, and Peah, for this can rightfully be called your field and your vineyard. It was his now, and now it is his. It was his when it was planted and it's growing, and now it's his when he's harvesting it. If I ever acquired a field that had previously belonged to another person that was declared ownerless, he's exempt from all of the obligations because it doesn't fit what the verse says, your field. In all instances, he's exempt from the obligation. He is exempt from the obligation of the tithes, as will be explained. In other words, so we'll learn that later in the laws of Truma, that where he makes his own place ownerless and then takes it back, he would also be in that situation. He would be exempt from the tithes as well.
Rabbi,
Okay.